Well, hello everyone. It is Friday, May the 17th, 2024. I am Delbridge, Benchmark Realty, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. This is your Status Chat. It's a weekly video blog dealing with housing and economics and the people ticks of how everything works in our economy so that we can make better decisions or be watchful of other people's bad decision. So today's little show is going to talk about something that we need to discuss. Be able to subscribe to this little button over here and click the notification bell so that YouTube will notify you when each Friday's blog has been uploaded. Thank you. All right, today we're going to look at the Fed data. One of the Fed banks, we're going to go to New York and we're going to look at the Fed's report. We're going to examine it. We're going to talk about some stuff. And this is government data. I'm going to get into some by age group type of information. It's playing a little bit off of that episode where I had the young Gen Zer in his car doing a TikTok thing. You know how they like to do, TikTokers like to whine in their car and cry and scream and that kind of stuff. And he was screaming that he hated the boomers because they ruined his life and they made it where he couldn't get a house, and life was rotten and it was all the boomers' fault. Well, if you saw the episode where I put up that little picture, because I wanted him to understand, the boomers didn't do this. The Gen Xers didn't do this. This is a relative new thing. If we go to the Federal Bank of Atlanta, the Federal Reserve, and we look up that thing called the home ownership affordability monitor. It's like a Case-Shiller index. It's just an index. This one is done by the government. And we look at it, we were rippling along both nationally and in our local metro area below 30% till after the election when they started spending all that money. And then we see the inflation hit and the interest level, there's both of them start to hit, and it takes it through the roof. That is a post-2020 thing. That's not a boomer thing. That's not a Gen Xer thing. That is a recent event because we printed too much money. So here we are, Federal Reserve Bank. This one is of New York, Liberty Street Economics. You know, St. Louis has the FRED, which is the economic education. All right. So we know that this one, Liberty Street Economics, is a different take, comes out of New York, and we have the home and other things coming out of Atlanta and that sort of thing. This one is Tuesday. All right before the CPI. And it says delinquency is increasing in the cards for maxed out borrowers. Now, somebody's got a little sense of humor. They're trying to make a little pun here. Delinquency is in the cards, like it's unavoidable. Well, let's talk about the CPI, for instance. The CPI, as you remember, is different than the PCE, which is what the Fed uses. It's a different consumer-based expenditure measure. The CPI is on the consumer survey side. The PPI is on the industry side, and the CPI lags what the PPI leads for. Because if you think about it, it makes sense. You got to produce a good or service before somebody can consume the good or service. So we want to watch our next PPI to see where it's going up or down. Now, we know in April that gas prices spiked up there for a little bit, and we would expect to see it. The way the CPI is calculated, what we just saw Wednesday, it puts most of the weight on the housing itself. Now, the PCE also weights shelter different than housing. They're a little bit different the way they're measured. But the CPI, if we look at that basket of goods, I think it's in the neighborhood of about a quarter to a third of the index is housing cost. We go down to about 8 or 9%, if I'm not terribly mistaken. It might have changed. But about 9% is fuel. So it's just a smaller, even though we may have had a big bump in fuel in April, it's muted because it's not calculated with that high of a multiplier in the formula. So that's something to keep in mind. But now let's talk about the delinquency is in the cards for maxed out borrower. Now, you know what a maxed out borrower, that's near 100% of their credit available to them. Now, I don't know if we need to read this, but this morning, the New York Fed Center for Microeconomics, not macro, but micro, that's household type expenditures data, released a quarterly report on household debt and credit for the first quarter in 2024. Household debt balance grew by $184 billion over the previous quarter. All right. I just don't want to spend too much time in this, but I want to get down here. We have a graphic that we want to get to. But one of the things I do want to bring up is this right here. It's obvious. What is a credit score? Because we're going to talk about this. A credit score is a prediction of your credit behavior, such as how likely you are to pay a loan off on time based upon information from your credit report. Now, the importance of credit and how you get the credit. Income is always one factor in getting a mortgage, but the credit itself, your worthiness, whether or not you have gone delinquent. If you go delinquent, you've broken your deal, you're past due. That does not help your credit at all. There's also something called the credit utilization rate, where we try to get it below that 30%. Why do you think we're in the home that we just talked about, the home ownership affordability monitor, we wanted to see that mortgage trickling across through space and time below 30%. We consider it, if that mortgage is below 30%, the home is affordable, and that rate is in the monitor is on the median in that area, which is based upon the median income and the median home price. It's principal, interest, taxes, and insurance costs. So it's four things. It's basically what most of us think a mortgage is, although technically that would have to be an escrowed mortgage, where we escrow in the taxes and insurance in there. And you can see they want to see that below 30% because it gives you a little bit of a buffer. Now here we're going to talk about maxed out borrowers. The credit utilization is important because we want that 30% or below, not necessarily zero debt, but we want it 30% or below, because if you were to stub a toe, have to go to the doctors, your transmission falls out, your water heater blows up, whatever it takes, you need a set of tires, something unexpected happens, and you need to really lean on that credit card for a month or so to keep things going. If you have 70% of your available credit left, yes, they'll look at how much credit you have access to, but they'll also look at the percentage that you're using it, because that's sort of giving them a sign that, they're using a whole lot of credit here, so they must be overspending or spending more than they need to for a prolonged period of time as it gets closer and closer to maxed out. Because you have very little bit of emergency fund, you should have a cash emergency fund. But if you don't have a cash emergency fund, you need a little bit of credit. And if you're maxed out, you've got nothing except an extra source of debt. Let's look at this right here. 0 to 20%. This is the borrower's utilization rate. That's what we're just talking about. Utilization rate. 0 to 20%, pretty well much a flat line, right? Would you agree with me? That's pretty close to be a flat line, and we don't have to be Columbo. And just one more thing here. That's pretty well a flat line at 0 to 20%. They're not being delinquent. They're not transitioning into delinquency, which is just getting that 30 and 90 days behind, however they're measuring it. They'll tell you down here in the bottom in the grayed out. But you see, as we go at 20 to 60, still pretty darn flat, right? Still pretty darn flat. Even though our 30 has been exceeded by the 60%. It's not when we get to 60 to 90 and 90 to 100 that we really start to go delinquent, because we're maxed out, can't pay the bills. That's just what's happening. I think I've got another one I want to look at below here. Now this is going to deal with some behaviors by generation. This is not my data. Don't you yell at me about this. This is the Federal Reserve of New York's data, and they separate out some in this table by age group, by generation. Okay, are we ready for that? I've done the disclaimer. We're going to go back and look. All right. It says median balance. That is not the average, but the most commonly occurring. Median credit limit and percentage maxed out. These are the percentage of that quartile in this case that are maxed out. So on the most poor people, the first and lowest, they have a median balance of $1,400. Pretty darn short, pretty small. That's not a big hill to climb, right? But their limit is low, so that's going to say they're going to be maxed out. So these two columns don't add up to this one. This one is saying 12.3% of the lowest income bracket are maxed out. But in that bracket, $1,400 is the median balance and $11,300 is their credit limit. Second next income, we step up a little bit. It's not until we get to the highest income that we have $25,000, $26,000 on a credit limit, of which you see the difference. There's not that much difference by rank of income what the credit card balance is. It's not really dramatic, but look at the delinquency, basically, the maxed outness, that they have no credit left. It goes way, way down according to income. Now, here we are with our generation. Gen Z, again, is not the boomers that made your dollar shrink 20%. It's the spending of the money, and that came after 2020 as we watered it down with all that free money that made every other dollar you had and your earnings go down in value and really cut into your purchasing abilities, whether it's a cup of coffee or a hamburger. Gen Z's median balance, look at this, only 760 on their median balance. That's like nothing much for a credit card balance, but look how low their credit limit is at 4,500. And they have the highest, the absolute highest percentage of those accounts are maxed out at 15%, even though they don't have much money. So it's going to be demonstrating, if someone were to look at that to evaluate you for credit, they're going to see that you have very little money left for the emergency fund. You don't really have a high limit of debt, but you also don't have a high limit of flex to get into if you were to blow a tire, drop a transmission, something like that. Now, we go up in the age group as we go millennials at 12.1%. They're about twice that, a little more than that, be 1,400. 21 would be 3.7, so 3 times that in the balance, but yet they're less maxed out, and they have a higher balance. They have a higher credit limit. Go to Gen X's and baby boomers. You see baby boomers have the less balance and the highest credit limit and the lowest percentage of maxed out accounts. So what does that tell us when we look at this? Well, for me, I look at it in saying that the baby boomers, being the oldest, probably have had a little bit more experience navigating tough times and rocky economics, because there's a good chance. Hello, I'm Delbridge of Benchmark Realty, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. If you are currently unrepresented and would like to know how to compare up to 3 properties side by side and room by room, then go over to my new YouTube channel, CallDelToSell. That's 1 L and Del, no spaces. Watch the demo on Real Scout, and then call me and we'll set up your exclusive ad-free account today. Economics, because there's a good chance, because 2008 came after 1960s and before, it's pretty safe assumption to say that every baby boomer that's still alive today went through 2008, the big housing crisis in there. We can probably see some Gen Xers having done that. So we have a little difference in some of our attitudes and the way we treat our money, and we see that reflected in this table that we have right here. It's not just income. Yes, it's lower with income. The higher the income, the lower the percent maxed out, and that gives you a good sense of common sense right there. But also with age group. And you see this rate right here, 750 out of a $4,500 maximum credit. That's going to be easier to get above 30%. Now let me find my last little slide here. All right, I have it loaded up. It was a link in the previous, the May 14th post that we find a link to this in November 7th of 23. Same Federal Reserve Bank, still Liberty Street Economics. We're going to slide this down and look at it. Credit card delinquencies continue to rise. Who is missing the payments? And again, this is not a diss video. We're not picking on any different generations and whatnot, but we're going to look at this and see where the challenges lie. And I'm going to bring it down to this one. Millennial credit card delinquency exceeds pre-pandemic levels, while baby boomers, Gen X and Gen Z are at or near their 2019 averages, their pre-pandemic averages. And here we see by color, the light blue, that's the baby boomers. They're pretty stoic as an age group. And you notice they don't spend a lot of money on the credit card, and they don't have a lot of debt, but they still have great credit limits. Speaking on the median, they have great. And it's pretty well much straight across. We see a disruption because of COVID, but they're rocking along right at that 1%. So 99% are not delinquent. Go to the Gen Xers, the next batch. All right, Gen Xers doing a little bit better, 1.5 to 2%. Right? Not too terribly bad. They're hanging in there pretty well. But you see the millennials and the Gen Zers, these two groups are the ones that are seeing the highest. And yet, when you really look at it, They're, except for millennials who were at 2% pretty well much, between 2 and 2.5%. Now they are up here at almost 3%. So millennials have had the worst degradation in their rate, and yet they're still not as delinquent as Gen Z is, because Gen Z is on the raw numbers higher, but Gen Z isn't as bad as it was from 3.0 to 3.5 range that they were back here in 2015. So they've not been as delinquent as they used to be, but yet the biggest change in delinquency has come about the millennials, because they are above their pre-pandemic levels. If we look pretty well much, the Gen Xers, if they're above it, they're not by much. They're pretty well much pre-pandemic. And of course, so is the boomers. So I think that's probably long enough for a show for today. We've got our numbers that we're going to get to right about now. Last week was the 10th of May, 2024. We had 19,943 in the opportunities. That increased over the previous period. We had 4,562 in the under contract still showing, that also increased over the previous period, and the ratio between those two stayed the same at 23%. Now this week we had 20,295 in the opportunities. That was an increase over the previous period, and the under contract still showing dropped just a tad to 4498. The integer ratio between those two of those numbers for the week of the 17th was 22%. So we dropped a point off of that. So the stressing point I'm trying to make is, and credit's always distressing, is when you look at your credit, there are multiple factors obviously in it. Are you maxed out regardless of what your credit limits are? Are you over the 30% credit utilization rate? How many cards perhaps that you have available to you, and what are their ratio? Like, what is your total potential debt? What is your total debt on that type of credit? And whether or not you have too many accounts, too high into each account, you're above your 30% in them, or whether or not you're just absolutely maxed out. Even if that credit limit is very, very low and the debt itself isn't that high, if you're maxed out, that's a bad sign, even if it's just one car. Now, how this goes into the big underwriting software, I don't know. I don't do underwriting. But I do know people that do mortgages, and we can probably, if you want to see what to do to get the biggest bang for the buck in the shortest period of time, because while you're sitting out here doing nothing, inflation is still making your home prices go up. Where can you put that money? For instance, could be Dave Ramsey is real big about thinking he has the answer to everybody's problem, and one of the things he says is pay all your credit cards off. They're too much of a temptation, but keep one for emergencies. Okay. Well, what happens if he likes to say pay the smallest one off first and get rid of it? Well, if you have on your credit report the reason why your credit's low, it says too many accounts. If you have too many accounts, well, then by all means get rid of a few accounts, the smallest one first, so that you can delete them. If you have a few on the account, like a buy now pay later type thing, and that's paid off, and that account sitting there, even though it's got zero utilization, it may be adding to having too many accounts. Get rid of it. So trim them down to a small number of credit cards, and then when you look at it, you might be advised, it might make sense, because it is a big deal to have credit utilization above 30%, is if you had $1,000 to put on credit cards, where do you put it across the credit cards you might have? Say you got 2 credit cards, and they're both over their 30%. One of them's got a much higher limit. You might say, well, that's a lot of debt I have up there, and it's getting close to being maxed out. Well, if maybe it takes $300 on the small one to get it below 30%, get it below 30% and then hit that big balance hard and start trying to bring that down so that you look like you have a little bit of a safety net if you were to absolutely throw a transmission or something. You need to show that. But you don't have to always be zero on your balances. You just want to be below 30%. And that's why we need to get you where you can have, they're not financial gurus, but they can look at your credit report and tell you based upon their experiences, if it was me, I would drop this one off, or I would eliminate the other one, or I'd pay this one down by X amount of dollars, that sort of thing. They can help you get that credit better, because inflation is going to rock on, and it looks like our rates are not going to go down. So what do you actually have control over in your life? You can't control the economy. You can't control much of this, but what you can do is maximize your credit, because getting a better credit can help bring your mortgage down, because not everybody pays the same. And if you're a very good risk, you get a better rate, generally speaking, than if you have crappy credit, because they're going to look at you as a high risk for default, and they're going to want more money, more percentage to get that from you, to take you on as a client, to take your mortgage from you. So be smart about your money. Be smart how you do it. All right, that's enough for this week. We appreciate you. Hopefully you got to see last week's episode. YouTube sent me a note, said we've deleted something out of your post because I had 2 websites that said had links to spam. They were MSNBC, both of them, and they were in the reference in the description. So who knows if this one will get canceled or not. I'm going to put the Fed link, the first Fed link, in the description so you can go look at these articles and read them through and through. Appreciate you. See you next week.